for me, it took you have to die. You have to leave your life. It's not like you do a workshop and now you're a medicine shaman. Like it's like no, you say goodbye, and then only then does the spirit. It feels your commitment, and I think it's really important. What's behind all these dark things is such a massive amount of energy from the divine. There's nothing outside of God, so there's such a massive amount of energy and self-discovery if we just choose to like actually try to see what's there, like really see, like spiritually see. You know, these people became really close friends with me. Many of them, total strangers, would be like, "Hey, you know, I just been hearing this thing about you, and you don't know me, I don't know you, but I want to hear your story." And that's the first thing I would say, like, "Oh my God, my heart, thank you." Like my heart just opens to you because I feel that's a beautiful thing for somebody to do.
Welcome to this new episode, and today I am here with Rich. How are you, Rich?
I'm good, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Very nice. So Rich is a very creative person on the island, and he is involved with different types of art, ceremonies, and much more. So very interested to talk to you today. First of all, I'd like to ask you, what is your story in life?
So there's been like some very distinct phases, but I would have to say I definitely had some rebirth kind of story in my early 30s. And I think since then, it's really just been like an aggressive pursuit of beauty and, you know, always kind of pushing my own personal edge. And in that, people seem to find me to do the same, like take them someplace beyond where their comfort zones are. And yeah, I feel honored to be in that space of receiving that much trust and vulnerability. And in that, I find that beauty. Like, it's the same as my expression as an artist. Like, for me, I see the world through the lens of beauty, and this is something I want to create. And the most beautiful thing about like this edge play, for example, is that vulnerability, is that like that human connection and the essence of what's happening in those kind of spaces. So yeah, beauty is a very encompassing kind of idea, of course. But for me, like that's how I know I'm doing something right, when it feels beautiful to me, when it feels like, yes, human, you know, and creative. I think that's something that we really have a unique part on the planet, is our creative ability. And if I could express divinity anyway, it'd be like the force of creation through us. So my life story took me many places because of that. Early on, I studied engineering and working for the U.S. military, teaching.
Wow.
Teaching engineering for nuclear power plants, like the submarines and stuff like that. Which to me is so funny because after that, it was such a hard divergence, like in a different direction. I became a tattoo artist, which I did for about 15 years. I owned a studio in New York, and during that time, I had like an increasing dissatisfaction with the state of the world. I was angry. I was definitely a very angry person. And I realized at some point I could keep getting angry and keep looking for things to support my bias towards anger and injustice, or I could do something about it and start changing myself. And I think a lot of people have some similar, it's like, some ideas like, well, you know, the classic, like, you know, be the change you want to see kind of story. I never heard that phrase back then, but I realized that was something I needed to do, and I started doing like just simple things like volunteering, things like that, and yeah, it led me to yoga. So at the same time that I was getting interested in yoga, I started getting interested in like shamanic practices. How that even occurred, I don't know. I think a lot of things just, you know, we're born and things find us the way we are. So I don't even know how I ended up starting to study shamanism. But yeah, Buddhism, it all happened at the same time. A lot of it, I say, it was an interesting thing. So like in the late 90s, 2000s, I saw a thing happen amongst tattoo artists, because that was my world at the time. A lot of like old school tattoo artists were like gang members, or, you know, we were like pirates, we were like anti-establishment kind of story.
Tupac, I remember. He was a gangster.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know if he was a tattoo artist or he was covered in tattoos, but the tattoo artists too, like a lot of us back then were like rebelling against something.
Okay.
And over my course of the years doing that, I watched everyone start having spiritual awakenings. And myself included, and I started wondering what's going on here. And I have a theory about it, but a lot of us got into Japanese art. Japanese has a very strong influence on tattoo art, which is full of Shinto, which is an animist kind of spiritual religion. Everything has a spirit. And that art also spills into Buddhism. So a lot of us started getting really into Buddhist artwork and iconography. So what do? We start buying books and looking for references and all that stuff. And I truly believe that just the downloading the transmissions of looking at these mandalas, looking at these artworks of the deities, the tanka paintings, and then you're like, oh, what's this about? So you start reading a little bit, you know? And I've seen so many people who were like very rough in life, you know, start having a big shift. And it was only through the lens of like, the only way I could see what was happening was through the lens of this art we were looking at. We were literally like downloading this information. So I had a similar process, and I started uncovering little bits about Buddhism. I'm like, oh wow, okay, I can get into that, like that philosophy, Shinto, about the spirit and everything, and the recognition of archetypes and nature and all this stuff. And it led me to shamanism somehow. I was getting a little more interested in plant medicines, you know, back then, like mushrooms were a big one, and this was all in America. Somehow along the line, people started asking me to bring them into the woods. I was having these great mushroom trips in nature. I'm like, no, it's not the same as like being in a party, you know? So I was guiding people on little mushroom journeys, and then I started getting into DMT and And I had a partner at the time. I think she was a big influence on me too with the yoga, and we decided like we wanted to go to Peru and see about this stuff, ayahuasca, which back then there was no internet like that had all this information. Like I tried looking up ayahuasca on the internet back then, and you couldn't find anything. You know, oh, there's some places in Peru, South America, the retreats were just starting to open. So it was really like, what are we getting into, you know? And we went, and of course it was a very transformative experience. And my curiosity was just peaked, you know. So at the same time, when I came back to New York, I remember she sent me a message like, hey, check this guy out. And there's this guy teaching yoga and shamanism courses. I'm like, what? Like, I didn't see the connection at that time. I'm like, okay. And I went to one of his classes, and like, I've had these few moments in my life where it's just like, the door opens up and you're like, oh yeah, like I have no choice but to go through this door. You know, there's such a high energy, it's such a high charge. And I said to him, like, that was amazing. I took one class, I go, that was amazing. I don't know what you're offering, but I want to be your student. Like, I'm in, whatever. And he said, oh, that's great. He's like, I have like, you know, I do these year-long courses. I'm like, okay. So I dove into that, and I was studying traditional yoga, like various, what would you call it? There's different schools of yoga, right? And he had a brilliant way of just connecting many things. We learned a little bit about Chinese medicine, the way that it applied to yoga. We started learning a lot about shamanism, particularly that of South American, like Andean shamanism, the guys up in the mountains, particularly Peru. And many things. And, you know, it was just this like rapid and challenging, like healing. You know, I thought I was going, I'm going to go learn some stuff. But as we discovered, when you go to learn how to be a healer, you're healing yourself, right? Yeah. So that was my first experience like that. And, you know, that was several years of practice with him. And then continuing to go to Peru. After the first time I went, I was like, okay, there's something here. And I started doing more and more extreme versions of that. And during that time, I was definitely feeling like the classic calling of the medicine to do something with it. And I kept saying no. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, to me, I recognize the significance and the kind of the responsibility that it required to go there. And I was like, no way. Like, I like my tattoo artist, rock star lifestyle, you know? But, you know, life has its ways, and a few more years of going, but saying no. Every time I would go, it'd be like, you know, you need to do this. And I was like, no, I can't do this. There's no way I can do this. Because I knew what it took. I knew that for me, it took, you have to die. You have to leave your life. It's not like you do a workshop and now you're a medicine shaman. Like, it's like, no, you say goodbye. And then, only then does the spirit, it feels your commitment. And I think it's really important. It feels that you were there completely, not like hobbying, you know? And I didn't want to. So life went on, and I ended up getting to a point where, I was engaged at some point and had a big house and blah, 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 all that story. And the satisfaction was growing with materials. I started giving my things away. I didn't know what was happening. I just like, I want to start giving stuff away, lightening up, and that felt good, lightening. And then just as I was about to leave my job and fly across the ocean to start a life with a woman I had been engaged to, we broke up. So it was like, no job. I couldn't go back. I could, of course, go back, but I didn't want to. No job, no material possessions, no relationship, and I was like, you know, terrified, but also recognizing this is the most free a human being can be. Like, I've never felt, it's so much freedom. It's terrifying, right? Because we come to rely on things as our sense of security. And I was like, well, what to do? And I had one friend, actually I met in that shamanic training years earlier. She moved to Peru to a yoga retreat center. And she said to me a long time, like, hey, anytime you want to come down, you're welcome. So I called her, and I'm like, yo, I need to come down. And I'm like, and she's like, oh my God, you don't know, I've been praying, I need somebody help. I'm like, all right, I'm there in a week. And I had no plan. I wasn't gonna go where I was drinking ayahuasca to study. I knew I needed to find my own way, my own masters. And that's what I did. And for me, that was like a rebirth moment. You know, it was the hardest thing in my life to do. And it wasn't done with joy. It was done from this moment of feeling I lost everything in some way. But there was the only direction to go. And I finally said, okay, yes.
So that's another rebirth that you had, yeah? Or is it the most defining one?
I think it was the most defining one. I think up until that moment, things were aligning to push me into that direction. And I was resisting, you know, but I think at that point when I finally went for it, and everything changed, you know, after that. It was funny, like, stepping back a few years earlier, it was like prophesized to me that after, in India by a sage there, like after a certain event, I'll be happy for the rest of my life. And it was hard to believe him because the way he said it, it was cryptic and I didn't quite understand. But at some point when I was in Peru, I recalled that years earlier, and he was exact to the day. But he cloaked how he said it, and when I realized that in retrospect that he nailed it exactly to the date of the moment that I would be happy. It wasn't about the date, the date was a signifier, and I would be happy for the rest of my life. And that doesn't mean I haven't had times where I'm sad, but there's always an underlying happiness, you know, like a happiness to be alive and to be feeling and to be going through even hard, challenging things. So that moment and that meeting, what he was representing was the meeting of my master, who he was trying to tell me what was going to happen, you know.
Okay. Can I ask you a little bit more, going back to your childhood? So you're born in New York, or where are you from originally?
New Jersey.
New Jersey, and then why did you study engineering? What kind of upbringing did you have?
Yeah, just a classic kind of urban lifestyle. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. Dad worked a lot, didn't see him much. He was providing for us. Mom was doing her best she could with 4 kids. It was challenging. I had a lot of frustration as a kid as well, and yeah, there was things that affected me very strongly. Particularly, I was raised Roman Catholic in a very hardcore way. So, you know,
me too.
There was that kind of paradigm to break out of at some point in my life. But all in all, you know, I was guided in a beautiful way through my childhood to become who I was going to become. Can't say I liked it at the time, but you know, looking back, you understand things have their own way of working out. So.
And then you graduated, and then.
Yeah, I was like an honor student. I didn't know what I wanted to do.
I was a very good student. Yeah, it was easy for you to like go through the exams, no problem at all, right?
Yeah, I have a very good recall, so I can actually just see, like, if I write notes, I can see it. So it's like when I would do test taking, it's like, oh, I just remember. As long as I studied one time, it was kind of in there. So that's the testing system in America. Like, can you regurgitate some information? And it worked for me.
Okay.
So I did good.
And then you joined the military.
Yeah, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was interested in maybe like special ops, like intelligence, kind of like spy games. Like that's just from like being a young kid watching movies and stuff, you know. I was interested in maybe being a pilot, and I started talking to recruiters, and they convinced me to go into the nuclear field because they get bonus money.
Oh, okay.
So they're like, oh, how do you take a few more tests? So I took a few tests and I passed them. They're like, oh yeah, you should do this, you should do this. They lied to you, of course. They tell, oh, that thing you want to do? Yeah, this is the best way to do it. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up in engineering and mechanics, which was cool. But
how many years were you in the military?
4.
4 years.
I was obligated for 8, but around the 3rd or 4th year, I started learning how to tattoo, and I was like, well, clearly I understood I was lied to, that the path I thought I was on was not the military path that they told me I was going to take. And such a stark contrast of like being a tattoo artist, working for yourself.
You know?
And I'm like, fuck this. And I convinced them, I got myself kicked out.
Because, you know, if I think of you now, I could have never imagined you had a military background, you know, because you think of the military very, very rigid, follow the discipline, very structured, whilst an artist, particularly the kind of lifestyle you were mentioning earlier, you know, you had almost a rock and roll lifestyle.
That was all after the military.
Much later, yeah? But still, you know, also the way you look, etc., you know, I wouldn't really put the two together. That's very interesting, right?
Yeah, most people are surprised to hear that. You know, it was good because it gave me a confidence that I've carried with me my whole life. I remember there was a moment, like I was in this massive engine room, you know, we use nuclear power to make steam, and steam does things, right? Just like every engine, right? And I remember I had this moment, I realized I was like, wow, like, look at where I am. And like, there's nothing in life I can't do. And there was like an equation, it's like time and attention, and that's it. Like if I can give something time, and I could give it my attention long enough, there's nothing I can't accomplish. And, you know, for all I went through in the military, I hated it for a lot of it. To get that out of it, it was worth it, completely worth it. Because ever since then, I've, you know, come up against things and I'm like, wait a minute, I know this formula. You know, time, intention, and attention, really, and that's it. So.
Okay, so you have this very diverse background, doing different things in life, and of course you said, you know, art, beauty, and also pushing people sort of, you know, to the edge of their comfort zone is something that really sort of excites you, right? Yeah. So now you've been to Peru a few times. You had your major transformation that was sort of, you know, foreseen by the Indian mystic. And what happened?
Well, Peru was a series of years of studying plant medicine down there, particularly ayahuasca, working at a center down there. And yeah, over that time, making a lot of connections with great people and just unfolding myself as well, constantly. And, you know, like, that's the work. It's just like, you're there with people at their most vulnerable, and for most people, it's, at some point, it's a peak life experience. I think, particularly if you're in the jungle, it's different. Like, I have a lot to say about it, which I might not say, but there's a big difference between ayahuasca tourism and going committed to heal yourself, you know.
Like it's different to do a yoga class in a gym or going to a traditional ashram in India.
Yeah, and spending time.
I mean, it's like, yeah.
So dedication to this plant is recognized by the plant, and the gifts and rewards, it's scalable, you know?
Sure.
So especially in the jungle, you know, I'm not working with some dude who's backpacking to discover yourself. I'm working with people dying, or people with sickness, and also curious people. But it gives you a very different perspective on life. Much as I was there supporting people, I was changing constantly and seeing life through different lens. And really, you know, taking this concept of the archetype of death as my master, as a teacher, and I realized that there's no life until we start kind of praising death and putting it in front of us. Then we start living, and having some really hard experiences. You know, the plants, ayahuasca is one of many plants. We get into some crazy stuff down there. It's not popular, you don't hear the names, but ayahuasca is just one of plants that, there's a whole forest of master spirit plants there, you know. So most of them want to take you to your death. They want you to see, hey man, like, you know, they're kind of like, hey, we're going to be feeding on you someday. Maybe you should realize that.
You know, I read some Castaneda, and I, of course, done quite a bit of work with death, and you know, the concept that you know, if you turn your head to the left shoulder, you can see your death following you all the time. And I think there is it's a bit of a taboo subject as well, because particularly in the Western world, people associate death with something that you cannot really talk about, which is it's very uncomfortable to talk about. You know, it's like, oh, you don't want to think about your death, but this is a constant that everybody has. You know, like the mystery of birth and the mystery of death is what starts and ends our life, in this form at least. And I also agree that, you know, if you are afraid of death, you're afraid of life to a certain extent. The minute that you can sort of rationalize death and like embrace it as not in some cultish, strange, sectarian, you know, occultist way, you know what I mean? Because you have to be careful, obviously, because, you know, you want to, you know, value whatever comes, but not indulge too much, in my opinion, in darkness.
Well, death and darkness, I think, are different things. But like what you're saying, people associate the two, and that's where they get afraid. Death is a dark, scary place, right? Yeah, and death of all, you know, not necessarily just, you know, death of end of my life, but death of an idea, death of a project, death of, like, as an artist, sometimes I purposely will just destroy something I'm in the middle of. Like, no, I'm gonna start over, just to practice letting that die too, and knowing the next generation, it will be better. The next generation will be better. So yeah, I think like one of the biggest lessons there was this relationship with death. And you talk about left shoulder, like I literally have had experiences where the spirit is there. Like I have a big angel of death with this big tattoo on my chest, which when I got it back in the day, I just thought like, oh, this is heavy metal, it's cool. I didn't have this spiritual relationship to it, you know? Mm-hmm. But looking now, I'm like, wow, like what I really embodied. And I've had those experiences in the jungle where death is whispering in my ear all day. And I'm like, okay, just leave me alone. Saying, speaking, giving me perspective, you know? I think one of the more valuable things I got out of that whole thing is to ask myself, like this is a very important question for me, is when I'm feeling something challenging, I say, you know, in the context of my death, what is my relationship to what's happening right now?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's why it's important to relate to it, and knowing that it's always following you, and you don't know when you're going to die. It could happen anytime, right? And but yeah, at the same time, though, I mean, it's of course, you know, if you think of some days I went through the concept of nihilism, and then that brought me into some reading on Wikipedia about occultism, and then I ended up even looking at some past historical events that are very, you know, terrible in some ways, where a whole nation was grappled by this concept of death, and even the elite in the nation were sort of developing some sort of cult of death. I'm talking about Nazism, right? Yeah. So there are, you know, I think it's a very fascinating subject, but one that you have to be very careful with and give lots of respect to, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I mean, it's I am very much, you know, looking forward to life and vitality and prana and energy and chi. So how do you? I mean, so you don't see a dichotomy between sort of light and darkness, life and death, or what's your sort of philosophical take on it?
I had an interesting thought the other day about dark. I think what we refer to as dark things, like I was kind of considering, like, if I change the word dark to either ignorant of or blind to, okay? And then I say, well, I don't know what brought this stream of consciousness I had, but it was an interesting one. So if something is something I'm blind to it, I'm blind to its true nature, so I'll call it dark. Like we can say horrible things are dark, but we're blind to the true nature. And I had this idea of like, well, if I stare at the sun, which is like we make the brightest thing that we know, right? If I stare at the sun, I'll go blind too. And I started kind of realizing like what we see in these things we call dark, and not to like put them up on a pedestal and to like make an occult out of it, but to just recognize that what's behind all these dark things is such a massive amount of energy from the divine. There's nothing outside of God. So there's such a massive amount of energy and self-discovery if we just choose to like actually try to see what's there, like really see, like spiritually see in all these things that we call dark. And there's plenty of darkness in the world to look at, right? The world's pretty intense. And from a very just like normal dark and light perspective, it's like, yeah, there's some dark shit out there,
Malevolence,
brutality.
So people just, hurting others for the sake of it.
What religions would call evil and Satan and blah, blah, blah. But, when you come back to the perspective, nothing is outside of God, which I truly believe, then what is it really trying to show us? Like, what is really behind it? And diving into that, there's that energy, there's that blinding light. And that's why we call it dark, because it's too hard to look at. It's too hard to see its true nature, So, I don't really have this dichotomy. I try to put everything together, and, that's when I'm like riding high vibes. I have my human self and my smallness, and I get caught up into it as well. The pain and suffering that not only I experience, but sometimes I'll create through my own ego and things like that. But when you come back to higher nature and higher self, like that's really what's going on. And not to worship death or be. I don't want to die. I love my life. I love living. But I have to accept and use it as a force to live more, to love my life even more, to create a life that I love even more, because it has from our perspective, it has a stamp on it, and it's a date, and it changes.
Cool. And so just going back to your life story. So after Peru, you spent a lot of time there, you said, on and off. Yeah. And you ended up in Copenhagen at some point, is that right?
Yeah, I was leading retreats to Peru, and my program was like yoga and shamanism. So I wanted to bring people to my masters, and I would support them, and then I would do the yoga support. And I got to know people, and there was somebody who was just telling me, oh, you got to check out this place. And she had been somebody in my life that had given me some really good guidance before. I kind of had like, you tell me to go, I'm there. Like, you got it. Like, she knows. So I was coming to Bali to do a yoga teacher training. I was leading one with a friend at the time. And I'm like, oh, it was my first time coming to this side, to Asia. I'm like, oh, I'll pop over and check out that Copenhagen place.
Let's get into more details now with your work you're doing at the moment. Yeah, so there is a ceremonial, sort of ritualistic aspect to it. There's always an artistic, sort of seeking the beauty part, and there's some sort of healing or like giving people some strong experience that might sort of awaken them or give them something, right? Yeah. Any other elements, or like how do you see your work right now?
Yeah, I prefer the word empowering over healing. Okay. I think they have different contexts. So people are coming to me for various reasons, and, I think the work happens before the ceremony or the session, in that there's a vulnerability that needs to be, there's like a doorway of vulnerability that they need to pass through. Mm-hmm. With the Kambo and this kind of work, there's fear, there's a lot of like understanding, there's physical reactions and being sick and all this. With the kind of Shibari work, which we didn't really talk about, but this is like this Japanese-based rope bondage. You can imagine the vulnerability of someone coming to that, particularly because there's a lot of like taboo and stigma around. Mm-hmm. They're misunderstood things, both. And so, people come and have really strong experiences, and I'm there to, one, give them an idea of what it's going to be in the beginning, take them through it, and help them to recognize the value of what they went through to carry that into their life. It's not just about doing that thing, but like, look, you're strong. Look what you've been through. Look how you can proceed and be a little more fearless, be a little more courageous. Now, Kambo and Shibari, for example, are very different in the ways that they relate and people relate to them. I would call Kambo healing. Kambo is something that comes in and causes a shift, or at least gives momentum towards a shift. And people come specifically to Kambo to clean out energy, to refresh, or to literally heal chronic ailments and things like that. So Kambo is very healing. I'm very cautious with that word with Shibari because I don't want to create an expectation, because my approach towards that's also different. I'm not trying to be your healer in Shibari. I recognize though you'll have an experience that'll be valuable, and we can talk about that. And when people go into, wow, that was so healing for me, I'm like, I'm glad that you had that experience, but it's something else.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
The reason I do that too is because I think when you create an expectation of healing, especially in Shibari, it's like, well, maybe I'm not here to heal you today. Maybe I just want to be kinky and play with, you know, boundary management, and you know that can help somebody, like guiding someone with boundaries or guiding somebody through a cathartic release. You know, I work with people, empowering people who are abused as children and spanked, and maybe we'll play with spanking play where now they're asking for it, and so changing the power dynamic where they're in control instead, and it changes their story, you know. But it's just so, to see it from the outside, it has so much, like, there's so much potential for misunderstanding and projecting your own idea onto it. So yeah, people come and they go in for a hard time in various ways. I mean, I even saw that when I was tattooing. Like, you want this beautiful art on your skin, you got to deal with the pain. And I was teaching people how to breathe back then, and I didn't even know what I was doing. You know, I just knew the breath helped. So my whole life has just been like on some version. I'm there, and often it's there. They're not only are they going through a hard time, they're puking their soul out, or they're shitting out toxins, literally. And you know, I'm the one there to be like, hold that space for them and keep them, let them know someone's there alongside them. And you know, there's various forms in which we do that. But
okay, so say ceremonies, Kambo, you say Shibari, something that you do right now. And on the artistic side, I mean, do you still do tattoos, or you stopped doing them?
No, I stopped doing because I wanted to start creating just for myself.
So you were saying to me earlier that there is a new project potentially, like an agency or something that you might be setting up, or? Yeah,
my most recent attraction is about wood, and so I want to, you know, Kumongan's got a lot of building going on, and I'm getting into 3D kind of either laser cut or CNC routing panel work, where these are like multi-panel, multi-dimensional geometric expressions. My art, I do a lot of different disciplines of my art in general, but geometry, particularly inspired by you know, psychedelic kind of experiences.
Like sacred geometry.
Sacred geometry, yeah. So what I'm doing now is just looking to find a place and investment and everything, because we have all these concrete buildings, but there's not much attention to the finer details. And I just want to start making Kopangan more beautiful, like the homes, you know. I see columns and even these interesting, you know, how the walls always pressed out. I'm like, I want to fill that with beautiful woodwork and cover these wires and, you know, do stuff that's like really interesting. And it's something I want to bring to the island for the community, like not just my expression, but I'm friends with a lot of artists who are very creative, very interesting people, and they get excited too. So we want to create kind of an art collective.
Very nice.
And start, you know, offering things for the people here. Like there's not a lot of art options in a place that's full of creative people. It's interesting.
It is true, because
it's growing.
Lots of creatives come through different kind of modalities, like the performing arts, obviously, but also, you know, visual arts, etc. Yeah. And I also agree with you, like compared to Bali, for instance, you know, we shouldn't be comparing things.
No, it's a good thing to compare to. It's a good thing to try to achieve.
The architecture there, like the level of sophistication, the interior design, the craftsmanship when it comes to, you know, furnitures, etc. I think Thailand has got it in some other places, particularly in the north, you know, in Bangkok, obviously. Koh Phangan, you know, it's a beautiful island. Nature is spectacular. But when it comes to buildings, indeed, particularly considering the amount of buildings that we are getting now, I think yes, sometimes they're not the most beautiful ones. So maybe you could add value because people have the money and they want something good, something artisanal, maybe something creative to add to their homes. And you say you can provide that. Yeah.
Everyone I talk to who's like an architect or a designer, hear their eyes light up when I say, because they know what I'm talking about when I bring these machines. They're like, oh yeah. And I think it's just time. It's just Copenhagen's ready. Bali is a great thing to aspire to as far as the aesthetic. And I just came back from Japan, which is like their whole culture is built around aesthetic and everything in the right place and beauty everywhere you look. I was just blown away there.
Such a deep culture there, yeah.
It was just, I was just in love everywhere I went with every building, every piece of tile, everything. This is so intentional, and I just want to bring some of that here.
One thing I like to ask you, I don't know if you want to answer. Sometimes, I think a few months ago you were sort of the object of some sort of little controversy on the internet. And one thing I like about you is that you're very articulate in the way you can sort of come across on social media. Do you want to talk about like some of the controversies that maybe surround somebody like yourself that maybe visually looks a little bit different, in a good way, obviously, and also is presenting himself as being on the edge in many ways.
Sure, I play with fire. Let's be real, I'm used to mentioning my look. I'm just used to that triggering people, and I kind of have blinders to it. But it's also been really kind of a cool thing throughout my life. I've had people come to me, and I don't know them, and they just like, hey, I need to tell you something. Oh, okay. I just want to say I judged you. I saw you, and they have some story about what they felt about me, and then they will admit to me, I realized I was wrong, and I just want to thank you for that opportunity. I literally did nothing. I just existed in the space. Maybe I was at a week-long retreat, and somebody was just like feeling scared of me the whole time, and realized I'm not scary. I've had many different instances of that. So that to me is such an honor and a blessing to like let people see their own story and then have the courage. My heart just opens to them. And likewise, I've had people come to me on the island who's like, you know what, I've heard something about you. Like, dude, there's a guy here, I had no idea. He was doing shamanic work, and I guess he was jealous. I was sending him clients. Because I just, like, people who were my clients would also go to him, and I figure, okay, they tell me he does good work if I'm not available. And I found out he was 2 years, he was having a campaign of spreading things. Well, on the simple end of that, I'm abusive towards women, which is a very easy thing to say. Like, you immediately can pull someone down with that if it catches fire. To the other degree of saying, like, he told people I killed his cat, that I was working for the CIA. Also, that I thought it was funny. He told me this story earlier. Like, I was here to destabilize the island. He said one of my partners who was singing in my ceremonies was like summoning demons, like really crazy shit. So there was 2 years of this guy leaking stuff out to people who it caught traction. So I have a lot of stories about me out there. But I had people would come to me and be like, hey, Rich, I heard this thing about you, and I'm seen with women all the time, so that everyone wants to make their projections about that. And they would just come to me and ask me for what I have to say. And like, my heart would open to that person so much because they're courageous and they're willing to go and ask the person that they heard about instead of just taking a rumor for what it's worth. Mm-hmm. And if I have anything to say about scandal, it's like if you hear something, because it's a small island, right? If you hear something and your immediate reaction is to continue to talk about it, like you need to talk about it somewhere else, the first place you should talk about it is with that person. Go feel for yourself. Because so much of this is a telephone game of he said, she said. Mm-hmm. And just at least go feel a person. Go see what's their response when you ask them about it. Like, are they hiding something? Are they willing to talk about it? Do they have a different perspective? Maybe they weren't even aware. I had people come to me and tell me things I heard. I'm like, oh, I had no idea that was being said about me. I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. And these people became really close friends with me. Many of them, total strangers, would be like, hey, I just been hearing this thing about you, and you don't know me, I don't know you, but I want to hear your story. And that's the first thing I would say, like, oh my God, my heart, thank you. Like, my heart just opens to you, because I feel that's a beautiful thing for somebody to do. So in the case of this particular thing, I don't want to get into the details, but what was the most challenging was she was insisting I stay silent about it. Like, she was trying to play like, we have a right of privacy and you can't say anything about it. And I knew for 2 months she was going around talking about me, and I didn't engage. The first thing I went was to some of my women friends and mentors and said like, hey, this is happening. And the advice I kind of got was, don't engage. She just wants your attention. I'm like, okay, they knew me. They knew I wasn't like who she was trying to say. She said I physically abused her. And I didn't engage for 2 months, and I kept hearing the stories getting a little crazier and a little crazier. And now I have friends calling me up, hey, Rich, you need to know this woman's saying these things about you, and she's saying there's other women involved who are going to come forward. And that was a big mistake of hers, because like there can't be. Like she's, oh, I have 4 or 5 other women. I'm like, there's not 4 or 5 other women I have tied at that point, you know? And I called all of them up. I'm like, hey, is there any grievance? No, of course not. I checked with, everyone I tied. So just in case somebody maybe had some feelings that they didn't express to me. And she went and basically did everything she can to silence anyone who had anything to counter her story. So she blocked everyone she knew I was friends with. She blocked any of the women that she knew like were supporting me. And that was really beautiful. I had a lot of like women kind of like take up this fight for me, because I was just non-engaging. So they were like doing the work of shielding and correcting the stories and doing all that. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger until the point where she, wasn't respecting my boundary. I said, you're not welcome to call me. Like, I know what you're doing. And I said, I know what you're doing. I have written statements. I have audio recordings, like, because she would call people and they would record because they knew that what was going on, and they felt her very off. So I had a lot of people like looking out for me, and she tried basically extorting me at some point. After about 2 months, she wanted me to pay for a bunch of stuff. She's like, I think you need to pay for this, and I'm like, I didn't even acknowledge that. I said, look, I know what you've been doing. I know all the therapists you went to and denied mediation because they were my friends. They're people who've known me on the island for years. No one was really believing what she had to say because they just knew me, And they did their best to mediate, and she was refusing mediation and all this. Long story short, she tried extorting me, and I just said, hey, I have all this physical evidence. If you don't stop right now, I'm going to the police, because this is illegal, what you're doing here in Thailand. And within 2 days, she made she made a fake account, blocked everybody who could say anything else, and made a post on Facebook about it, And I was kind of like, it was horrible. Like, I heard she went to the police. I felt my life threatened in this way, like all this story. It was horrible to go through that, but I also am like, oh, it's my turn, because I hear so many, and I had a lot of people come forward. Like, once I finally made a statement, a lot of people came to me and told me they had problems with her too. I had guys doing the, oh, me too, bro. Like, this one, I was at a cuddle party with this one, and she started saying all these things about me, or I was at this, or I was at that. And I'm like, okay, well, at least I know that I'm not the only one. And I had my own process to go through. Suddenly feeling anyone who looked at me, I didn't know why they were looking at me, and like feeling very self-conscious and all that. And I had to go through a little death there,
Well, it sounds very stressful to me. It sounds very stressful to me indeed. But yeah, I suppose that's what life brings sometimes, and I think it's the way to handle the grievance or the problem that really shows the character of an individual, and then it's what to say. I mean, it's. I don't know this person, so there's nothing I can say really. Just because people ask me, what do you think of Rich? So I don't know anything about him. That's why you're here now chatting, and it's interesting to meet you. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, what makes you excited about Koh Phangan still? Why do you still think that Koh Phangan is a great place for you to live?
It's a good question. I think it's a good question in light of a lot of people are saying Koh Phangan's changing. It's very different for me now. I mean, and because I'm relating to the community differently. Basically, I'm very introverted now. So I just love the potential, the force of potential here. Like I said earlier, there's so many possibilities to go in any direction you want. And if you focus, you'll find the support you need there. Now I have a smaller group of friends that I've had time to nurture this friendship, and it's hard with all the transients. You're always having these 2-month-old relationships or 2-month-long friendships, and then bye. So I've gotten to know the people who are here as well, and they're beautiful people, and great things are happening. So first, it's still community. I think we're responsible for our sense of community. Like, it's not just about who's there, but how do you relate, how do you invite them in, and how do you make yourself available to them.
Yes.
And there's the nature, of course. I love being in the jungle. And there's an exciting energy. I do see things changing, and I do see things growing, and those of us who are committed to the place have to take responsibility for make sure it changes in the shape that we want it to. So I'm here to do that. I'm here to add this design element for now. I'm here to be a valuable resource for the people who come and don't know who's here. Anyone who comes to any of my sessions, part of my aftercare, like, look, I'm here and I've been here a long time. Anything you want, consider me a friend. Ask me if you're not sure about who's doing certain practices, if you're not sure what to do or what's going on. There's those of us here who can, vet other practitioners, because otherwise you have, like, how do you pick a yoga class? How do you pick a this or that? There's so many. So I just kind of feel, I'm a little older. I feel mature in my responsibility to be a middle-aged elder type.
No, seriously, you see yourself? No. Because
Yeah,
you don't come across as middle-aged to me at all.
Well, I mean, I'm 42, but I mean, I've lived some life,
Okay.
and I've packed a lot of life in those 42 years. I've had a lot of life. So, I think our generation didn't have much elders to guide us. We had the hippie new age movement of like the 60s and 70s, and a lot of those people abandoned that. And so some of us need to take up that role early on, because I have elders. I went and found them. I went to the jungle. I have indigenous elders.
It's important, I think, to have mentors and even senior teachers in the community, because I think Kopangan is there's lots of like very young people that want to learn, seekers, young and less young, but sort of newer people that want to seek, learn, develop, change, heal, and transform. So there's lots of like a sort of excitement and lots of potential at a junior level.
Sure.
There are some senior teachers that I admire, but I think we need more senior teachers that really have a role of community leaders here, and I think it's very badly needed. And some of the senior teachers I talk to, they look down on the community. They say, "Oh, it's a kindergarten, it's a spiritual kindergarten." Come on, man, just raise up to the role, right? Yeah. Just be a leader of sort, right? Yeah. And I think that's very much needed. That's what's missing maybe a little bit. Although, I have people that I admire. Yeah, for sure.
One thing I would like to see more of here is there are these teachers, but I've been kind of calling people out lately publicly, because I believe they're good people and they have good hearts, but I see what I call is like this diluting. There's a diluting of valuable things, and I want to encourage people who are giving like training, how to be this kind of facilitator, how to be that kind of, like, come on, stop the 3 days, stop the 1 week thing. Like, we need good teachers. Make good teachers. If you have something good to offer, please dedicate your time. Make yourself available to a student who's dedicated, not somebody who has a weekend to learn. I think the apprentice model is something that's being lost in time, and I would love to see those who have, there's so many people with really good knowledge, but I think they're caught up in like the turnover. Like, oh, I need to do another retreat this week. I need to do another teacher training this week. It's like, why don't you make your 1 week training a 6 month training and see who sticks around?
Yeah.
And we'll have 3 really, really good teachers out of that instead of 24 people who had a week of training.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we need a little bit more depth sometimes. I think that the island is perceived as more of an entry level, if you want, So people get a glimpse over 3 days, and many people that come through maybe would not be willing to like commit for 6 months. I actually support everybody, including people that are new facilitators, maybe don't have so much experience, because I see Kopangan as a laboratory of sorts, where here if you have, the courage to, and the calling, so the compulsion, to start a class of sort, you can do it here. It's quite rare, because most places are highly regulated, you need insurance, there's so many problems, so many, whilst here is a laboratory of creativity, and it's a new age place, so you can mix different and collaborate with different people from different backgrounds. I really value that, but I also agree that we need a layer of senior teachers that hopefully will come to the island. Some of the ones who've been here for a long time, maybe they will step into a bigger role, So there is need, for instance, on a asana side, there's this guy called Michael from Boiler Room, for instance.
Yeah.
Yes, so he's of course physical asana, but the guy is he's great, I really like him, and I know some, for instance, Mikal Hora, I think I really like her,
Sister. She's been like so helpful, like for me on the island for all this years. She's really
and it's good because these people have, they're more senior, more mature as teachers, and I think we need more of them. But I wouldn't, destroy sort of, the grassroots, the experimentation, the laboratory.
I like how you say that, the lab.
Because, you can finish a teacher training course here and immediately you can go to Zen Beach, buy donation and teach yoga on the beach. I value this, I value this like very easy, relaxed, laid back, can-do attitude that we can have on this island in particular because of the Buddhist culture, because of the way Thailand is and Koh Phangan particularly. But I know what you mean. Certainly more senior teachers and more depth is next phase.
I think it's important then for people to like acknowledge that and say like, hey, this is a week-long training, but please like go deeper, because you also have, if you look at the attention span of youth now, like
shorter and shorter.
TikTok culture.
Oh God, yeah.
If they're misled to think like, oh, I did enough, I did my week-long training, then they're never gonna go and I'm worried about things getting lost and depth happening. But I like what you said, this laboratory, and it is valuable. We do need a place to practice and to play. I think it's the responsibility of the teachers to instill that in their students, be like, this is a taster, like go deeper. If you like this, please go deeper.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's a life's journey anyway.
Sure.
I mean, I've been learning things for 10 years now, and I feel I'm just at the beginning myself, although I do yoga, meditation twice a day, every day, and I'm very fascinated. I keep on reading and developing. But Rich, thank you very much for showing up. Coming all the way to Chalaklam. I don't know where you live. You live here?
I live in the Maluan.
Okay, very nice. But thank you for coming and sharing. And Kapun Kap.
I really appreciate the space to speak and to get to know you a little bit as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Koh Phangan.